holds a goodly share of bliss when the sun gives way to April showers.
April showers, they come your way. They bring the flowers that come in May. So if it's raining, have no regrets, because it isn't raining, you know, because it isn't raining, you know, it's raining violets. When you see clouds upon a hill, you will see crowds of daffodils. So keep on looking for a bluebird and listening for his song. Whenever April showers come along, though April showers may come your way, they bring the flowers that bloom in May. So if it's raining, have no regrets, because it isn't raining rain, no, it's raining violets. And where you see clouds upon hills, you soon will see crowds of daffodils. So keep on looking for the bluebird and listening for his song. Whenever April showers come along. Just keep it there.
Today, our speakers are Lynn and Tim. You're going to, and before I'm not going to have us sing a song. I would like just to recognize these two wonderful people. So please come up and do your thing.
Good morning. So this morning we'll be exploring the metaphysics and symbolism of this time of the year when nature begins to wake up and bring new life after a long 4 or 5 month hibernation.
This is the time of spring's return, the joyful time, the seed time, when life bursts forth from the earth and the chains of winter are broken.
It's certainly no coincidence that the high holy days of both the Jewish and Christian traditions fall on this time of year. Our Jewish brothers and sisters are celebrating the last day of Passover today in remembrance of their ancestors' experience of passing over from bondage to freedom, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. And then in the Christian tradition, of course, Easter holiday is the most important day of the year as they commemorate the events that unfold in the 4 Gospels in the New Testament. That is, the story of the central figure of their religion, Jesus of Nazareth, rising from the dead, rolling away the stone from his gravesite 3 days after the brutal execution he endured.
Recently I saw on Facebook an obituary for Jesus. It had interesting points. As to his resume, Jesus was self-educated. He occasionally worked as a medical doctor, and it is reported that he healed many patients. He spread the good news. He healing, touched the lonely, fed the hungry, and helped the poor. He was a storyteller who told spiritual truth in parables. He fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves. He healed a man who was born blind, and he celebrated at the end of his life the Last Supper or Passover. As Tim said, this is a very important day because the end of Passover is today, Easter is today, and the Orthodox Christian Easter is also falling all on the same day. Orthodox Christian priests, by the way, can enter the minister married. So they're interesting to follow. His body was placed in a stone grave given by Joseph of Arimathea. Days later, he was seen again in spirit as we here see those who have crossed over and make manifest. And he said, "Greater things shall you do." In lieu of flowers, the obituary read, "Try to behave as he did." I also wanted to share a bit of a quote from Edgar Casey, who is a teacher who was very Christian, but in his reading state opened up to many things: spiritualism, reincarnation. The pattern of Jesus, the way shower, is a pattern for us all. Quote, "Christ is not a man. Jesus in one incarnation or lifetime, Joshua in another, Melchizedek in another. Jesus was the man, Christ the messenger, Christ in all ages, Jesus in one." And Casey said, Jesus is the man, the activity, the mind, the relationship that he bore to others. Yea, he was mindful of friends. He was sociable. He was loving. He was kind. He was gentle. He grew faint. He grew weak. And yet gained that strength which he has promised in becoming the Christ by fulfilling and overcoming the world. We are made strong in body and mind, in soul and purpose, in that power in Christ. The power then is in the Christ. The pattern is in Jesus.
Okay. So whenever I taught Bible classes during my time as a staff minister at the Tri-City Religious Science Center, I noticed that the question on everyone's mind was always, how historically accurate is all this stuff we read in the scriptures, like the Passover or Easter story? And I would go a little bit into my own conclusions based on my own studies, but then I'd have to say, ultimately, it doesn't matter. You know, was this Jesus a historical or mythological figure? It really doesn't matter. What matters is the truth, the great truth that these stories are pointing to. Both those aforementioned stories are not just about events in the Middle East that supposedly happened 2,000 or 4,000 years ago. They're both symbols of a great awakening that's always ready to happen within each of us. That is, an awakening to a greater understanding of who and what you are, and in turn, the unfolding of greater good in your world and in your life experience. And even centuries before Judaism or Christianity crystallized as formal religions, people throughout the world were telling stories and practicing rituals to awaken themselves to this greater understanding. Oh, and by the way, we get the name of this holiday, Easter, not from anything biblical, but from the ancient pagan celebration of the goddess Ishtar, who symbolized spring, rebirth, and fertility. And this would take place on the vernal equinox, when there were equal parts light and darkness in the day.
It is a time when light and dark are equal in this ancient form of religion. The Celtic people, most of our ancestors come from there, practiced it and honored the wheel of the year and the seasons. Light and dark are equal. It's a time of balance, when all the elements within us are brought into a new harmony. The Prince of the Sun stretches forth his hand. Kore, the dark maiden, returns from the cloaked in fresh rain. Wherever they step, wildflowers grow. Despair turns to hope, sorrow to joy, want to abundance. The earth is renewed by the goddess, and the goddess was an ancient form of our long spiritual one tradition, in which the Creator was seen not only as Father but also Mother, not away from nature but harmonizing with nature. And this is a time for her. She had many names. They all come from the one. Estra is bringing our ritual that has survived that we call part of the playtime of Easter.
And the hare, spelled H-A-R-E, the animal often mistaken for a rabbit, was one symbol that was part of this tradition, as it was noted to be very fertile and capable of producing many offspring. So many of the traditions that our culture has adopted into the modern holiday of Easter are direct descendants of this ancient pagan tradition. You know, the magic bunny who comes around when everyone is asleep and hides the colorful eggs in the yard, fills the children's Easter baskets with candy and goodies. I always thank the ancient societies such as the Sumerians, Babylonians, and Celtics for the rituals and traditions that evolved into the fun children's fests we have with modern holidays such as Halloween, Christmas, and Easter. So let's take a quick look at going back to that Passover story, what it teaches us. Now, this is the short version. If you want all the details, you can always go back, dust off your old Bible, and read the book of Exodus, or rent the Cecil B. DeMille movie with, was it Charlton Heston? But in essence, it starts with a backdrop of the country of Egypt around the 14th or early 13th century BCE. And the Hebrew tribes were living there as slaves and second-class citizens, and they were begging God to get them out of there and set them up in a land of their own. And as often happens in this sort of situation, a great leader popped up. In this case, it was a man named Moses. He was a Hebrew by birth, but raised by Egyptian royalty. So he had spent his young adult life living in luxury and getting the finest education available, but realized what a corrupt political climate it was there. So he had to abandon that life and lived his older adult life in the wilderness, working as a shepherd in a country called Midian. So he had taken the time for intellectual preparation and spiritual preparation. And so God had a talk with him one day and told him, "You're the man for the job. I need you to lead these people out of the bondage of Egypt and into their own land, which I promised their ancestors centuries before." So Moses reluctantly agreed to this monstrous task, and after a lot of blowback from the Egyptian pharaoh and a lot of divine intervention, he finally led the 12 Hebrew tribes out of Egypt, and that was many thousands of people we're talking about, and they were ready to go straight to this land called Canaan that God had told them was to be their sovereign nation. And Moses was ready to lead them there, but God told him, "Not so fast, bud. These people first need to learn to live as a free nation." So they spent the next 40 years living as Bedouins in the desert, and during this time, Moses developed a legal system for them to govern themselves for when the time came that they were ready. But the sad part of the story is Moses could look over the mountain and see this promised land, but God told him, "Sorry, Moses, but your job here is done, and it's time for you to move on to the afterlife." So he died, and his right-hand man and scribe, Joshua, took over as leader and led them into this promised land. Now, looking at the metaphysics of this, Moses represents the consciousness that we develop to get us out of the darkness, out of a catastrophic situation. Now, how many of you have ever been at a point in life where you've lived with financial difficulties, or even poverty, or a health crisis, or an abusive relationship of some sort, and you're just sick and tired of being sick and tired? You've just had enough. And you start listening to that still small voice within telling you that there is a better way.